And now I leave the floor to Maria Rontogianni, again, Head of Internal Audit at Alpha Bank, and Francisco Martinez, Chief Audit Executive and Deputy General Manager at Bankinter Group, Spain. The floor is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Claudia, for the introductions. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new session of this banking forum. The topic that we are going to discuss now is related to the expectation from the regulators for internal audit and audit committee with the new regulations on sustainability. We are very lucky today because we have two high-level panelists to talk about this interesting theme. First is Maria Julve, that is the head of the Non-Financial Risks Experts Division at the ECB, within the Directorate General Horizontal Line Supervision. Currently, hi Maria. Currently, she leads a team of international, highly qualified managers and experts on governance, risk management, anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing, operational risk and resilience, information, communication and technology, and fintech. In the non-financial risk division, Maria and her team support and provide guidance to SSM supervisors, conduct horizontal and benchmarking assessments, and contribute to developing policies, methodologies, and supervisory tools. The other panelist is Federico Pierobon, that is head. Buonasera, Federico. Federico is the head of section at the European Central Bank. He leads the team responsible for the coordination of the supervisory review and evaluation program, and for the development and maintenance of the methodologies through which SSM off-site supervisor assess non-financial risk. Federico started his career as a supervisor at Banca d'Italia. We have a lot of questions for them, and if time permits, we will take questions from the audience at the end of the session, so through Slido. Okay, Maria.
Thank you, Paco. Allow me to start the discussion where Patrick Amiss left off earlier this morning, in a call to all auditors to reach out to their JSTs to be proactive, as we heard earlier, in case of doubt in compliance with regulatory expectations. So Maria, in keeping that in mind, we are reaching out to you collectively now today and looking for you to share with us how you assess the effectiveness of internal control functions in terms of progress and in terms of attention, areas of attention.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you very much, Paco. I hope that you can hear me well. So first, let me thanks again, Andrea and Pascale, for inviting us here. I think I was here in the conference last year, and clearly this is a very big opportunity for us to engage with internal auditors and, of course, with the audit committee members. I think Patrick mentioned please feel free, and I'm really encouraging you to reach out to the JSTs from the horizontal functions. This is really an opportunity, and the idea is to take this as an exchange and dialogue with you today. No. So Maria, you were asking how do we assess the effectiveness of the internal audit function. Let me just highlight, first of all, the importance that we do place in the internal audit functions, okay, and the third line of defense to ensure really that that institutions operate with sound risk management, governance, and internal control. I really do not need to highlight how do we assess it, in the sense of that we use a regular and annual SREP cycle, that the JSTs assess the internal governance effectiveness and functioning. But also what we wanted today, or I wanted just to take a bit the opportunity, you mentioned, or Paco mentioned, that we do a lot of, in horizontal supervision, a lot of benchmarking and horizontal activities, no? And I do think that this gives a lot of value added for us and also for JST to see where the banks stand compared to others. And I think also for you, no, to see, okay, which are the areas where you are better off or areas where you are worse off, what are the things that you might have adapted and what others are doing. I think this really helps to understand what can be done to to enhance the functioning and effectiveness. So this year we ran a benchmarking review for 27 significant institutions in the SSM, which is quite a relevant number, and I wouldn't say that this would apply to all significant institutions, but of course the learnings and the things that we saw, I think they are comprehensive enough, and I will try to share with you a couple of ideas. So what we assess mainly when we look at the internal audit function is really four main topics. No, I think the ones could be the governance around the internal audit function. The second one, the methodologies. The third one, resources, and then lastly, stature and effectiveness. No, so when we refer to governance, mainly what we are talking is the appropriate reporting line of the head of internal audit function, no, and the reporting lines of this third line of defense. And what we are seeing here is that overall, we assess that there is an adequate reporting line that is ensuring the independence of the internal audit functions. However, we still see that I need to say that there are very few cases, okay, where still this reporting line and direct access to the management board could be enhanced, but this is not really what is concerning us. In overall, we see that there is a regular communication with the board, and there is regular dialogue, regular exchange of information. Relevant reports are shared with the audit committee, at least on a quarterly basis. And as at good practices, what we are seeing is that, for example, something that is very important for us is that the head of internal audit holds regular meetings with the audit committee chair on a regular basis, only with him, no? So bilateral meetings with him on this. However, we see also some areas of attention that I would like to share with you, which are, in some cases, the limited involvement of the board and the audit committee on the oversight of the internal audit function. This could be enhanced. And in some cases also, and this is not in some cases, I think here the point is a bit bigger, is that there is limited involvement of the board or the audit committee in the appraisal, the objective setting of the internal audit function head or the staff. Okay, and maybe this is something that we would like, let's say you, especially the audit committee members, to take forward and to think how you are in your organization. If we move to the methodology, and I think this was raised a bit before, that internal audits need to be everywhere in the organization. I took this idea. I think, of course, we would expect the audit universe to cover all the risk, all the business activities, all the control activities, and all the control lines, group entities and branches. Okay. Overall, I think we see that there has been a lot of development on the risk-based methodology, and I would like to highlight three areas also for further attention on your side, where we see that in some cases this could be enhanced. The first one is the audits on risk appetite framework. Okay, in some cases we are seeing that either the content is not as comprehensive as it should be, or the periodicity where this is done is a bit longer than what we would expect. Also considering the changing environment that I think you have been discussing. Also, the other point would be a bit on group subsidiaries and bank branches. Sometimes they are not included, or they are not included as they should. Okay. And finally, I think non-financial risk. I think this is an area that there is no doubt that this is increasing importance on this. I think last year we were covering operational resilience. This year we are covering, or the topic of the day is ESG. No, so I think this is something that in some cases could be enhanced. The third point that I mentioned was a bit on the resources, and I think this in the previous panel this has been raised also. There is a difficulty in attract talent. Okay, skills and knowledge are becoming much more technical also, and what we are seeing and what our JSTs are telling is that in some cases the internal audit function might be a bit understaffed. Okay, so I think I would encourage you also to discuss with your JSTs to tell you how they see this compared to other banks also. No, so I think of course IT resources are scarce. Okay, and sometimes it's even difficult for us. No, there is a tendency to first, let's say, cover the business lines or what is the need for the business. Then we move a bit on risk management, and then sometimes internal audit. I don't know how you think about it. So I think this is something that I would like to raise with you. And then finally, the last point that I wanted to highlight is a bit on the stature and effectiveness. So I think here what I mean is to, apart from having the appropriate stature within the organization, it's important the process of following up on the findings that internal audit raises. No? And I think here we have identified some areas in the follow-up on recommendations, on the classification of findings, sometimes escalation or findings or disagreement. Okay, when there is a disagreement between the internal audit function and the business lines, sometimes there is a bit of unclarity of what the final decision and the reason for why the things are taken, and in some cases the level of intrusiveness of the reports. However, we have also seen very good practices also that I wanted just to raise with you today. So in case you are not one of these, you could see that, or in case you are one of them, maybe you could expand a little bit on this. So we have on the follow-up procedures banks that clearly defines the roles and responsibilities, that there is a clear engagement with the auditee on the closure criteria, that any delays on the implementation is clearly reported and escalated, and even in some cases discussed specifically on this. On the stature of the internal audit functions, we see also that in some of the cases, when there is a lot of good practices on the rating of the issues, and the internal audit judgment prevails in case of disagreements, or in some of the things, in case there is a discarded findings, also this is escalated also. So I think really to complement that, again, I think if I would encourage you, and especially those banks that have been in this targeted in this horizontal analysis, to liaise with your JST and to see how this can be improved, because I think one of the things of the BCBS principles of internal audit is really the close interaction that we need to have the supervisor and the internal audit function. So try to leverage a bit on this. So I hope, Maria, this answers a bit your question.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, you touched upon several good practices and areas for improvement that are tangible. I thought it was quite interesting on the stature and the effectiveness, one being more tangible with the issue follow-up, while the stature is also supporting what we heard all day long in making sure that internal audit's voice is heard holistically across the organization, and it's challenging. Thank you for that.
But Maria, I can't resist. You have been talking about the internal audit function, and you have mentioned several good practices. How do you assess the effectiveness of the bank's board to oversee the internal audit function? And if you can put some, you have seen some good practices in that area. Could you share them with us?
Thank you very much, Paco. Indeed, also let's say the oversight role of the board and the audit committee over the internal control functions and internal audit in particular is something that we do assess also regularly as part of this REP, and also as part of some other specific ongoing activities, whether it's in on-site inspections or horizontal analysis on things. I don't know if you are familiar, or many of you are familiar, one of the key flagship projects that we have within the context of the SSM priorities is the targeted reviews of management body. And indeed this year also our teams, and so Federico and mine together with the JSTs have also done a targeted review on management body steering capabilities, and this included a bit of the assessment of some of the nomination committee, the remuneration committee, and the audit committee. No? And I think we had one exercise that was conducted last year for around 20 banks, and then we will have a second round of this exercise in this year. No, so I think we have seen progress, Paco, going to your point regarding the role of the audit committee and the oversight of the internal control functions. And indeed, I think we see that overall the audit committee is one of the most mature board committees that we see. So I think this is very good news, and we really would encourage you to continue, or the audit committee members here to continue doing that. I think just a couple of areas for attention that I would like to call out. The first one is the role of the audit committee in drawing up the internal audit plan. Okay, so approving and providing its opinion. We have seen that in some cases we would expect more from the audit committee here. Okay, so I think maybe this is something that we can discuss a bit further, because we have seen that a number of banks, and here I could say about around half of the banks that we saw in the samples, let's say the assessment, so that we would have or we would our expectations were not fully met. Okay. And then I think the other area that I would like to also to highlight is I think on the performance assessments and the objective setting on the KPIs, no? And I think here we think that this is something that the board audit committee needs to have a closer look at it here. So what we have seen, for example, is that in some cases there is the dominant CEO that could hinder a bit the independent oversight of the internal audit functions. We have seen maybe variable remunerations a bit too high. We have seen that the control setting targets are not as they should be. Okay, so I think this is something that we would like the audit committee to have a look at it. And then I think the last point really that I would like to highlight is also in some cases the internal audit, the audit committee, whether it could push a bit more to detect areas for further improvement regarding the resources that we were talking before, the backlog, the audit universe, the audit cycle. So I think those are some of the things that maybe the audit committee members could push a bit harder. On the other hand, I think we have detected some very good practices that could be expanded for some other audit committee. So we have many cases where the audit committee has established tools and processes to enable oversight, KPIs to follow up and to regularly monitor how the audit plan is going, the follow-up on the findings, the backlog. We have seen even cases where this point that we see on the staff, okay, that there is a follow-up on the turnover, on the rotation, which I guess is an issue almost everywhere now, but really the audit committee really making sure that the internal audit function has enough resources to do that. Some cases where there is a very fluid communication between the head of internal audit and the audit committee, and then this is translated also to the overall board, one-to-one meetings on this. So I think this is very important. And then the role, the interlinkage between the audit committee and the board also. So I think those are areas where we have seen also a lot of good practices here.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing with us your views and these interesting good practices. I'm very sure that all of us will check the gaps in our organizations immediately.
You touched upon a few challenges already at the end there, and having the audit committees focus on us. How do you see the challenges faced by the internal audit functions in this rapidly evolving environment?
I think in the session that I attended, some of them have been mentioned already. So, and some of the challenges are not only related to the internal audit functions, but are, let's say, more on the environment that we live in. First of all, I think we should not forget the traditional risks. Okay, and I think this is something that we need to think about it. And I think given the rapid things, the volatility, having really a close look at the ICAP, the RAF, the ILAP also. I think, unfortunately, I think we miss an opportunity several years ahead, where liquidity was not an issue. Funding is still there, but I think focusing on the risk control. So I think this is something that we need to look. However, the portfolio of topics that the internal audit function need to look at is much broader now also. So I think the challenge is to make sure that this portfolio of topics is well understood, okay, and that is clear what needs to be done. And I think here we would have topics like operational resilience. We covered it last year, okay, not just digital, but everything, digital transformation. We could have, within this, we would have ICT, we would have cyber, risk data aggregation capabilities. This has also been a priority for the SSM, and it continues to be. And having good data and timely data, this is critical, and also for you, all the non-financial, the ESG geopolitical tensions, which means also AML increasing, AML risk being very high on the agenda, sanctions. So that means that the overall portfolio, I think, again, I would mention it again, internal audit needs to be everywhere. So the challenge really is to make sure that there is the right prioritization, and the prioritization, if needed. I think overall we tend to be very good at prioritization. The prioritization sometimes is not that easy to find the room to do that. And I think the skills, no, I think, of course, you need to have the right resources, the right skills, and the right knowledge in the organization to do that. And then I think the last point that I would like to cover is the audit planning. Okay, so the audit planning, of course, need to be somehow stable. Everybody needs to have a plan to try to work along this plan, but it needs to be flexible enough and being able to be adapted very quickly to whatever happens. No, we saw the war a couple of years ago. Now we see the new developments. Then we have many crisis cases. So I think it's important really to remain flexible, to adjust to these type of things. And then the other challenge that might be, and I think that was pick a bit upon before, and I think Federico might touch a bit upon, is the role of the internal audit between the typical assurance role, okay, to the advisor role. Okay, so I think in my view, even when internal audit function is asked about the strategic topics, which I think is a very good symptom in an organization, because that means that internal audit has the stature and has a say in many of the things. But you need to be very careful about it, because you need always to have the independence on mind. You do not need ever to be the decision making on these type of things. But this is more easy saying that really implemented it on a day-to-day basis. So I think this point, I think, might create some frictions, and it's very important that in all these topics or these tasks is really being discussed and understood what is the role of the internal audit function. And then the last point that I could highlight is that, of course, I mentioned IT in the sense of the risk that the internal audit functions need to assess, no, within the organization. But of course, there are many tools also that can help, and new technologies that can help. So I think the internal audit function in general need to adapt to these new opportunities that might come, but understanding what are they, and how you can leverage on that, and making sure that no matter what tools you might use, you need to understand what's going on behind it. You need to understand the data. So all the risk and opportunities behind digital transformation within their own internal audit function.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. I think that for the internal audit function, as you mentioned, it's a very big challenge. We face to changing and complex regulations, so we need to have a very well prepared and updated team with the appropriate skills, with multiple knowledges. And we live in a very competitive world, so we have to be able to attract talent and retain the team. So it will force us to make significant efforts in training, in compensation, in culture. So big challenge, definitely. I would like just to ask to Federico, because well, during the whole day we have been repeating that the ESG regulation is complex and it's evolving, and it's not always easy to identify what assurance is about when we look at ESG. So what's mandatory for a bank? What is coming in terms of new regulation, and what is important or nice to have, but not a must-have? Federico, please.
Thanks a lot, Paco. I hope you hear me well.
Yes.
Thank you. And also good afternoon to you all from myself. Very happy to be here with you. Many thanks for inviting us. And indeed, that's the case that the sort of breadth, the span that Maria mentioned before is evolving very rapidly. In all frankness, it's evolving for you as it is evolving for us. So we're also coping with limited resources and a changing landscape and a broadening landscape. And this can only be achieved if we have some, I think, guiding principles to illuminate a bit our work. At least I will try to get there in my answer. So indeed, the regulatory landscape is evolving. We have the EBA report on ESG risk, the BCBS principles on the management of climate-related financial risk. The FSB has also written a report. And as you know, the CRD6 is about to award new mandates to the EBA, in particular, to work on more guidelines for the assessment of the climate risk, both for banks and for supervisors in this rep, for example, and also something around the climate risk stress testing. So a lot more to come and a lot more new elements to come. Given that, what are the minimum set of expectations sort of that we can have? You mentioned a bit the mandatory part. Not very easy to say what is mandatory, but what are the areas that have been a bit stabilized? And I think I would have a few. First is something that I haven't heard in the previous discussion, and that's related to data availability, good data availability, data gaps that are filled, no blind spot, and is also affecting the credibility of the information that needs to be disclosed by bank to the external. So there is both the data element, the correctness of the disclosure outside the bank, and there's an element of the indicators that are used, both financial and non-financial indicators, to identify the risks and any potential gap. So that's a bit of an infrastructure mandate on climate, at least. Then there is a transition itself. So here it's about the timing between the performance and the evaluation cycle, and the timing that the bank has for transitioning to meet the target. This comes together with the strategy, the identification of the areas that are not yet, ESG, or where there's some gaps in the materiality assessment, in the factors that affect the business, and so on and so forth. And that, sort of strategic dimension calls in the governance arrangements, which are very broad. I mean, you recall before the management body, the role and efficiency of the committees, the awareness at the management level, but also very concretely how banks are remunerated, how the internal incentive structures work, for that matters. So I think these are all areas where our expectations are well codified. The sort of infrastructure component, the business model, strategic elements, and the governance ones. However, I mean, let's be clear. As I said, it's a rapidly evolving environment, so we cannot live by in a compliance-oriented fashion. And here is where I think requirements will get you this far, honestly. And that's why we have principle-based expectations. I think Marco Piccito before recalled to that, and I think it's really what can help you distinguish what's mandatory from what's nice to have, but also reflect the speed of individual institutions. And here I would offer a bit my personal sort of overarching principle, and that would be that institutions should consider climate-related and environmental risk as drivers of their existing risks. So it's not just about making sure that we comply with the rules, but climate consideration should really be part of the risk management toolkit, the standard risk management toolkit. And this is not because the ECB or some other proactive or less proactive supervisor, is prompting you to that, but because these risks are increasing. So these are the new landscape of risks that the banks are facing. Does include climate-related ones. I don't have to. I think Patrick has spurred you enough into action this morning. I don't have to recall here floods in Slovenia. Disruptions in Germany, not so far from here. The wildfires in Greece this summer. I was on an island over there. It was pretty pressing. But I think this is really changes to the risk landscape that are to be reflected in the risk management toolkit. And this is the utmost and foremost, I think, goal also for you as one of the line of defense of the bank.
Okay. Thank you, Federico. I'm sure that Maria wants to ask you questions.
Yeah. Federico, this time of year, all of the audit functions across the banks are preparing their analyses and working hard to develop their annual audit plans or their plans for 2024. In that light, could you share with us your insights on how should we integrate ESG into those audit plans? For instance, shall we take sustainability and make a dedicated audit? Or shall we look at sustainability across all of our audits, so across all of the audits that we do and that are relative to sustainability, or both?
Thank you, Maria. That's a fair point, absolutely. And I think you were discussing before the reactive or proactive role. Here it's also another sort of layer of ambiguity that is not too destructive, I hope. But it is true that a certain level of reactivity is embedded in a sort of audit plan element. And at the same time, we do expect you to be proactive in shaping how this works and focusing on what's one of the most important element. Let's go back to sort of the target, at least to make sure that the ESG considerations are well embedded in the standard risk management toolkit of the bank. Climate affects bank credit risk, operational component, the external communication and whatnot. I don't think we want you to develop a separate sustainability-driven audit program per se. Rather, you as a third line of defense could reflect, in our view, on the level of maturity reached by the institutions and calibrate your audit plans accordingly. That may mean embedding, for some institutions that are a bit more advanced, embedding climate risk considerations or ESG consideration at large into the standard audit program, in whatever type of audit is done, say internal models, validation or review of the setup from governance arrangements in the board, remuneration, compensation, and so on. For some other institutions, some more preliminary initiatives make sense, I think, or at least is what we see. The level of speed is not the same, and it's a very conscious and aware institution, the one that calibrates its responses in relation to what it sees. Here, I hope the ECB guides on climate risk supervision provide with a few examples of best practice reviews. I'm sure Patrick referred to those this morning. There's a whole list of sections that it's been there. I wouldn't repeat the words by Maria before. We do expect a certain level of agility. So we see that especially in its advisory role, the internal audit can be asked by the management body to undertake several tasks. In some cases, it may be part of the formal audit program that you're working on. In some other cases, it may be something more ad hoc to be developed or delivered on the tight timelines. And I think here it's also important to leave some room for these sort of more agile needs, because your independent review and support of the institution, I think, is pretty vital in a context of rapid change.
So thank you for that. I think we heard all morning about the advisory role, maybe non-traditional, being agile, or having or not having a rated report. And it sounds to me like there's no wrong or right. We all need to consider and use our judgment in regards to the maturity of our organizations and how we integrate these, whether it's ESG as a topic, or E, the S, or the G, in dedicated and a mix of both in accordance to the maturity. So thank you for that, Federico. That was very important for us.
Yeah, I agree. We have in Bankinter we have a dedicated team to ESG that leads coordinates the work, but it's impossible to have in that team all the experience in the different risks that we face when we talk about the ESG. So, because we can forget that the ESG is totally cross. So, I think that many banks have specific programs, but at the end, includes in many audits the performance of the specialist of other risks. Credit, financial, capital, operational, governance. So, Federico, I would like just to ask you a question about how do you recommend to address some specific challenge related to ESG. For example, sustainability and remuneration or data readiness. So how do you recommend that?
Thanks a lot, Paco. So indeed, these are two rather specific and pretty challenging areas. So happy to spend a minute on those. On remuneration, I think what we see is that institutions, the one that you supervise, are increasingly adopting some climate-related metrics in the compensation frameworks, and this comes from the reduction of carbon footprint, how much sustainable finance is provided to clients, and also some kind of accountability measures. For example, some banks are keen to be leaders in a certain area and they include it among their KPIs. It's where the financial sort of indicators or market share of certain products merge into the non-financial ones. That's also important. We have scorecards or any other indications, but also third-party sort of evaluation assessments on how well the bank is performing under ESG that incorporates very broad factors like diversity and inclusion, for example. It's a landscape that is evolving very quickly. These indicators are, as at any rating, sort of they're subject to external scrutiny. They're visible. We do get an impression that sometimes have a bit jumping down, but in general, there's many indicators over there, and they're used to shape remuneration packages at individual levels or the collective level for the management body, for example, for the senior management team. We do see the overall impact as a bit modest at the moment. So I think I'm just trying to provide a bit of an overview on what we see before going into the various challenges, but we're not talking about a huge sort of part of the compensation packages for the time being. Now, given this very heterogeneous, rapidly evolving, yet not too material sort of world, how can the internal audit help and drive forward the agenda for the bank? I think here it's a point that is a bit related to your second part of the question, the one on data. But in general, this is pretty difficult, and it's about not just how it can be measured, what are the right indicators, but ex ante understanding very well the risks in the first place. And this is where I think you were starting. Also, Maria commented the expert judgment, the maturity in the review. This is essentially something where I think, having looked at various ways of financial innovation in the past and how they had affected banks or institutions at large and their risk management, internal audits can be in a position to incorporate in the work plan and assessments. Having said that, doesn't come without challenges. So there's it would be easy if we were to be clear about all the regulatory requirements, and there is a certain element of ambiguity there, admittedly. Some jurisdictions have started to incorporate or to prepare some more specific guidance, but there's no one-size-fits-all framework, and I think these available pieces of input can all be making sort of an input into internal audit function, taking a principle-based view on what's there. There's a second dimension, a second challenge that gets me a bit into the data point, that is understanding what are the right indicators. What is a good proxy? We do, I think, as consumers are part of the public, we do get a sense that most people, most institutions reporting about their ESG compliance or advancements are among the top 10% or whatever indicator, because these indicators are a bit not standard at the moment. So I think we do get a perception that we need to understand better the risk before and then decide what are the best metrics. And that comes to the second part on data availability and data quality. And here I would really like to sound, I was referred to that before, but I would really like to sound up as a sort of a call to make sure that this is really well understood and concrete advancements are needed here. Good data is a prerequisite for many other processes, and we do still see recourse to proxy sources of information, for example, for greenhouse gases emissions or for the energy efficiency of collateral. And there's many providers out there, external providers, that are making a hell of good money in providing with information to sort of compensate for the lack of internal information at banks. But some banks have not yet taken a sort of a buy or make sort of decision, and we are a bit worried in a way. I think the broader stance on the quality of risk data by the ECB and the SSM at large. But essentially, as one of my previous bosses used to say, in whatever financial model, garbage in, garbage out. That is, how can we trust the quality of the information or what are the decisions that have been taken, for example, in relation to the pricing of certain loans, taking into account ESG factors, if the input information flow is so bad in quality or is not reliable at all. And this is where I think we get a sense of urgency a bit. And I'm not sure how much is shared by you as internal audit functions, but we as supervisors are a bit worried about the quality of the line decision making when the data that we see being used is so inadequate or patchy or relying on legacy systems and old-fashioned. And this is perhaps an area in which we do see the internal audit to provide some independent reviews, independent advisory to the board about how much progress is needed here in steering the risk management framework. It's one of those cases which you may want to have full regulatory guidance or expectations to tick the box and have a compliance, sort of more compliance-driven approach. And this would be very tempting, but there's not such a thing at the moment. And I think we ourselves are not there in terms of providing something more, but good principles, solid principles for you to exert your judgment and your knowledge. And we are very committed to facilitate sharing best practices, let the knowledge accumulate in our community to emerge and to be used by the broader system. But ultimately, the sort of expert call, I think, is yours.
Okay, Federico, thank you very much. Well, we have more than 400 people connected right now, and I'm sure that we will have a lot of questions from the audience. They are sending us by Slido. And well, we have the first one. I would like just to ask to Maria, how could internal audit cooperate with the compliance function? Maria?
Okay.
Okay.
I think the question or my answer would be twofold. I think for sure internal audit needs to cooperate with the compliance functions, but then there is an additional role is that the internal audit needs to ensure the adequate of the second line of defense also. No? So I think this is the two aspects that I would like to raise here. Sometimes it's not... there needs to be really well defined what is within the scope and within the mandate of the compliance function, okay, and making sure that they do what is expected from their side, okay, and then the internal audit function in their assurance role. Okay, they need to make sure that the compliance fulfill its mandate. No, so I think there is we go back a bit again to the point on the assurance and the working together here. No, it's not just working together with the business. Also, the internal audit functions work very closely together with risk management or with AML function is separate from the compliance. No, but I think I would like really to convey that the point of this assurance is also critical for us.
Maria, perhaps you can support us in looking at the next question that's come up on Slido, which is internal audit always has different roles, advisory, assurance, and we deliver different types of reports. And what are the recommendations from the ECB on the types of reports we deliver, whether they be advisory or assurance? I think we heard a lot earlier today about rating, not rating, agility. So if you can take that for us, please.
I think on the advisor role, I think the critical point that I mentioned a bit before is really there needs to be a clear delineation of what is the role of the internal audit here. Internal audit should never be in the driver's seat of the things. It would never be a decision making here, and then is a relevant stakeholder in the organization that has a view on the things, no? And of course, this is a bit what happened with the risk management function also. Risk management function should not just enter or speak when the risk has been taken, no? Because otherwise it might be a bit late on this. But if we think about the assurance on this, I think the report, at least from my experience, especially when I was the JST coordinator here from an ECB or from a supervisor perspective, the scopes need to be very clear. Okay, what is the scope of the activity? What the techniques were used? What were the findings? What is the severity of the findings or this? What is the reasoning? What are the root cause? What are the implementation plans, whether in the report or later? What is the deadline? I think the report needs to serve its purpose, no? And to serve its purpose is like, as I think we are, the supervisors our aim or our goal is not to raise findings, is not to issue a SREP letter with 400 findings, no, or get to a SREP score of 4 or a P2R or a P2G of X, is to ensure the soundness of the governance and of the system. And I think the report should help on that. Okay, so there needs to be clarity on the report, clarity on the roles and responsibilities, clarities on who needs to do what, clarities in there is a disagreement, what happens with that disagreement. It doesn't need to be a novel, of course, but it needs to be very clear and to the point who needs to do what and by when and what happens if not. No, so I think the reports need to be very clear on that, and this needs to be done in written form. I don't know if this addresses a bit the.
No, you definitely supported us in making sure that the techniques, the findings, the scope needs to be clear, and for all expectations, our voice needs to be documented, and that's clear for me. A clear message from you here today, and that our advisory role takes on active participation in meetings and committees, and many times that's not always documented. And so the expectation from the ECB here is clear, that our advice needs to be in written form. So thank you for that.
And if I may, Maria, just to add on this is on the severity of the things. I think sometimes it's very difficult to rank depending on exactly where they are. But again, the severity of the findings or saying, okay, where is in the scale is because then that helps prioritizing, making sure that everybody is aware, they know what the things are really severe that needs to be tackled on the first place or not. So I think it's important because we need to convey the message. The teams will need to convey to you, you will need to escalate to the audit committee, and this requires expert judgment to tell the people, okay, this is where we need to focus, and you need to raise this point also.
Okay. Thank you. One more question for Federico. How can internal audit best develop their ESG audit program in view of diversity of parameters, evolving regulation, etc.?
Thank you, Paco. Thanks for the question. I think the first starting point is really to understand well the risks that the bank is exposed to. As I said before, there's very limited room for ensuring that a full compliance sort of driven exercise takes place, because expectations are evolving rapidly, because the regulatory framework is patchwork at the moment, or it's itself evolving very quickly. So I think a sound understanding of the risks and the risk faced institutions, and a good determination of what's there is the first and foremost element. The second is to try and measure those risks, and to try and find the right, as Maria said, having a conversation not just on perception, but on something that is rankable, measurable, a bit objective. Move on the discourse towards something that is a bit more aligned to the standard risk management toolkit, I would say. And I'm afraid that comes a bit with the quality of the information in the first place. So how reliable is the input? How good is the coverage of ESG considerations? For the broader risk management toolkit. I think these are really the starting point. Have a concrete look at the risks, try and rank measures, and then embed that into a work plan that will be a bit reflecting the expert judgment. I'm afraid there's very little way around it with these emerging risks for the next few years. But having a robust, a bit principle-based approach to some of the risks that you see and that we see in frankness.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to take the floor and ask for what we asked the previous panels, in that there's over 400 people listening to us today here, mostly auditors and audit committee members. Any last pieces of advice for us, either in our roles of auditors or AC members?
I think maybe if very quickly, I think Patrick mentioned it, no? So dialogue with the supervisor, this is critical. I think you need really to have a dialogue with the supervisor both ways. Okay, so the JST should be able to explain to you how they see the risk in the respective bank, and for you to understand that, and the same. Okay, so you need to have, beyond the specific concrete thing, how you see the risk, how the assurance, how the control framework is working. I would encourage really the internal auditor to do that, and also the audit committee. No, I think it's important, and I think on this we see different practices. Okay, and I would really encourage the audit committee members, and of course the chair of the audit committee, to discuss from time to time with the JST and raise this. And then I think internally I would encourage for those cases where there is no if there is not enough dialogue, or you think there is not enough dialogue directly between the internal audit and the audit committee, to do that, and then the role of the audit committee vis-a-vis the board here. So I think this is critical for the internal audit to be able to fulfill its mandate, and for the audit committee and the board to be able to fulfill their challenging role also, and the oversight capacity. So I think this could be my 2 cents here, and then be ready for the evolving landscape. This is very difficult. We as supervisors are also evolving ourselves, and this is a journey in which we are also embarking. Federico, don't know if you want to.
Thank you, Maria. I would stress the two-way nature of the dialogue that you mentioned before. So I think we are also evolving. I mean, I had the unit responsible for coordinating this REP as a process, and we're also trying to have, you've read the recommendations from the expert group. We are trying to evolve our framework to a bit of a less compliance-oriented one towards expert judgment. And that's, it's also a cultural shift on our part. So I think we're here to share our own challenges, and those have been publicly broadcast by Andrea in disclosing this report. So it's not an issue. And this is specifically relevant for the dialogue. I think we want to move away from this sort of yearly meeting with the chair of the audit committee. That is sort of a bit the starting point that we have adopted. And really, this dialogue should be something that adds value for both parts, including on your part if something is not clear on behalf of the supervisor. If some of the expectations, some of the measures are, a bit too foggy, if there are some ways in which the intended outcome underlying the measure is not too clear, or something is a bit missing in between the sort of the finding and how you see the supervisor asking you to remedy or to address issues. I think this is quite important and very valuable for us as supervisors. We're trying to keep our teams to deal at best with these sort of exchanges. So many thanks, and I think this is one of the occasions in which establishing a constructive dialogue is conducive to better and smoother relationship going forward.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Federico. Thank you both for your valuable insights that will strengthen our internal audit practices and board committee practices. And in one summation between this morning and this afternoon, I think we go back to tradition and increase the dialogue between us on a regular basis and evolve that communication learning on risk and controls. Thank you both for your valuable insights.
Thank you very much to you for having us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria and Federico, for your clear messages and advices. And we have to reach to the end of the session.